We've been praying for Nigeria by church every year. It's not anything. You pray for Nigeria, you pick a word that this year is going to be the year one thing, one thing. The hearts don't
I
change.
usually think it. There's just been a lot of like oppression, whether it's from colonialism, whether it's post-colonialism, whether it's like civil war. There's a lot of things that have added layers to a lot of people being in survival mode.
Part of helping to build a better Nigeria is being able to ensure that you have a place that you can go and you can have an identity. You can have Happy New Year. Happy New
Happy
Year.
New Year, Mash.
Happy New Year. Happy New Month. Happy everything, man.
Yeah,
Happy
I'm glad
everything.
we happy everything. Happy post vacation. I know you've also been traveling a little bit.
Yeah.
But it's good to finally have this in the books.
Yeah, yeah.
I know it took us a little bit while to one, find the location, two, find the time.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
everything just finally aligned, and I'm glad we're doing this now.
Yes. Yeah, it should be fun. It should be a fun conversation. It really should be a fun conversation. I think this one with talking about how Nigerians should view Nigeria it's a very interesting one actually. Because legitimately, I don't believe everybody should have the same view about something. However, I think it will be interesting to have the conversation and see how things go or where the conversation goes. But I'm actually wondering, what's your take? So, if you, for somebody who has been out of Nigeria, like you've been out of Nigeria for a little bit,
Hmm.
and I think Nigeria is in a very unique place where we are aware of what goes on in developed countries
Hmm.
and we are
Hmm.
linked to developed countries. So we've always looked up, and whether it's just because of TV or just the fact that we speak the same language as some of the most developed countries in the world, but we're able to link ourselves or feel like we are part of an international community, or we could be like an international community. So, like, when things come out of Nigeria, when news comes out like of Nigeria, and it's like it's negative, be it like things with the transport system, be it things with the medical system. How does that make you feel?
Oh, that's a big question. But just to give our listeners a little bit of context, then I'll answer your
Mm-hmm.
question. Is more so the inspiration for this particular conversation came from during the holidays. I think there was a couple of high-profile tragedies that happened
Yeah.
in Lagos specifically. And I know in our group chats we were just talking about like, Nigeria has happened to somebody and so and so. And you raised a very good point that, you know, a lot of times it's like, people like myself or just Nigerians in diaspora coming back with different expectations of how either they want to move around or how they want to be treated or how things should work. And then when things don't work as expected or things go awry, for example, then we usually default to like, oh, Nigeria has kind of happened to me or something like that. So that was the inspo, and I really, really found it super fascinating what you were sharing because I had not thought about it in that lens before. But to answer your question specifically, like when I see things happening in Nigeria, a lot of things have even come close to home too. With there's been a lot of insecurity. There's been, I think right now there's like a lights out situation going on. So when I hear that, um, there used to be this sense of like powerlessness, I would say,
Mm-hmm.
where you're like wondering like, hey, like what can I do? Or how can we even move forward? Because sometimes it's hard to see progress. So you see what is possible, and then when you see Nigeria kind of in a way, I don't want to say withering away, it's just this is the initial feeling is sadness, helplessness, and then usually just because that's a little bit of my personality, then like, what can we do? Like, what is in our control? Or when I say what is in our control, is usually what is in my control to begin with, and then what is in the control of my immediate like friend group, immediate family, and then the big picture, like Nigeria as a whole. So usually I go through that very quickly. It's like I'm super sad, feel helpless, and then quickly I try to say like, okay, what can we do now? But it really depends. Like sometimes it might be as helpless as a situation of like the only thing I can do is actually just pray. Like there's nothing you can do. Right? Like legitimately, there have been situations where like there's literally nothing you can do from thousands of miles away. But there's always maybe little actions that one can take. But I think it's just the sadness of knowing what is possible and seeing that it is not happening. And it's not unique to Nigeria per se. Like a lot of countries are like that. You know, we are super blessed in Nigeria with a lot of resources, with a lot of smart people too, with a lot of potential. But seeing that potential not realized, I think for me, it's a continuous sadness and hope. They're always mixed together. Of like, oh, I'm kind of sad that we're not where we should be, but I'm also hopeful that we can turn things around. Um, so that's kind of how I see it. I don't know, how do you see it from your POV?
I think it's some. To be honest, most times I'm numb to it now because I've been, I think I've been listening to negative news about Nigeria for years. Like I'm numb to it now. But the other thing about it is that part of the numbness is not because of a certain level of disappointment or a certain level of blame. I think there's the numbness in the sense of we can do better and we need all hands on deck to do better. Like, we always say that Nigeria has some of the smartest people in the world, which it does, and Nigeria has a lot of natural resources, which it does. But a lot of the issues come from the fact that we are also a country who well understands the fact that there's always greener pastures somewhere else. And I feel like a lot, we call it brain drain, right? But the brain drain has a real effect. But it's not just only that you lose a lot of people who are smart, you lose a lot of people who know what, for instance, good governance looks like, or good medical care looks like, or good primary school, secondary school, university, what that looks like. Like, you lose a lot of people that know what a good life looks like, what a proper standard of living should look like. And you lose people that can fight for that dream against the current reality. And I think it's interesting because a lot of people use the phrase or the sentence like Nigeria will happen to you, which is completely fair. Like Nigeria happens to everybody. And that is what it is. Like you can go home today as a young guy and legitimately get arrested or get killed just because you look a certain way or you shouldn't have a certain car or something. You go out. There's so many incidents with women being maltreated just because they're walking by themselves. Like it is true that Nigeria will happen to you if it's not there. I mean, I think everybody has a story of Medicare in Nigeria and legitimately losing somebody that should still be alive today. So I think there's a lot of anger that comes with it, which is justified. But I also think that it is important to understand that the people that are there are the people facing it head on. And the people that know better, a lot of people that know better, that can help other people have a better standard of living, have left and have not looked back. And when I say they've not looked back, it's not that they've not looked back to help their immediate family, which is always the case. You're able to provide funds for your immediate family back home, and that's okay. But they've not looked back in the sense of helping the community grow,
Mm.
you know, creating businesses that can affect the livelihood of the average person, not creating some opportunities that can get you funds from the US, or also not creating like an NGO that is there to siphon money from grants somewhere. Like day to day businesses that can help the common person. survive. Day-to-day shifts, day-to-day upgrades that you can make is that help the people going to the hospitals. It helps the people going to the schools. Like looking back and making sure that your your neighborhood, your immediate environment is a lot better. I've always wondered, like, legitimately, what does it mean to look after your neighbor, and who is your neighbor? And that's something that I battle with a lot because a lot of people, like, it's very interesting that people born in Nigeria would go to another country and get another passport and be so excited and burn the Nigerian passport, all of which is valid, right? Because Nigeria is a place that has disappointed you or that has given you horrible memories and stuff like that. But I've always battled with that, comparing that, and understanding the fact that you're actually leaving your neighbor behind and that neighbor is suffering.
Mm, mm.
So it's like how to put those things together is like the biggest thing I have on my mind in terms of looking back home. You know, I've
Let me
always been
ask
on
you
a,
something.
yeah, yeah,
Just curious as you, sorry to interrupt, just curious. So, like, for example, somebody who leaves, and like you said, like, for example, people who never look back,
yeah,
you bring a very interesting perspective of the concept of like, who is your neighbor, right?
yeah.
The neighbor you left behind to still think of them. But if we were to zoom out,
Hmm.
in your mind's eye, why should the average, again, I'm asking this just to hear more about your heart. Why should the average, like maybe Nigerian in diaspora, care about the the nation, right? We
Hmm.
both know that we should, but again, without putting any expectation of should or, why should you look back? Why should you start a business? Why should you care about? I think a lot of times we get, I think the friction is between this as an individual, why should I be the one doing that? Why shouldn't it be, So that's the question. I'm just curious where your heart's at. Like, why should, if you could speak to, use me like to me right now, like, why should you, quote unquote, do this for a better Nigeria?
It depends on what you call home. If you call that place home, then by default you should try to make your home better. By default, right? Because you will always be a foreigner in someone else's home, regardless of whatever the situation is. You will always be a foreigner in somebody else's home. So if you care about being at home, then that's the situation. I spoke to someone once who told me that it was important for them to have their kids go to a school with people who look like them,
Hmm.
because it's extremely important for you to understand that there are people that think like you, so that it's not that your name is so weird that you stand out and everybody knows that you're different. You know, it's the understanding that you may not be able to give your kids that, but you may be able to give somebody else's kids that opportunity to ensure that they feel at home, they're home. It's ensuring that your community is kept valid. It's ensuring that your ancestry, your heritage is kept valid, that your stories continue being told. That aside, I think regardless of the situation, I fully understand why people would just go and not look back. But I think not looking back in terms of helping and then criticizing doesn't help the
Hmm.
situation.
What do you
Because
mean
if
by
you
that?
if you care so much about this situation, then you have to do something to change it. That doesn't mean moving back, right? As an example, it means, and a lot of people did this in 23. A lot of people made a sacrifice to go home to vote because they wanted a change. It wasn't like they were going to
Hmm.
stay in Nigeria or anything. They didn't plan on living in Nigeria. They just wanted to go home to make a change, right? That is doing something. That's actively doing something, actively participating to make sure that, there's a better Nigeria to come. I think it's what a lot of us, it's what we desire. We desire to have a better Nigeria. There's a lot of people today. If there's a miracle that happens and Nigeria becomes a better country, there will be a population issue because a lot of people will pack up their bags and go home.
That
You
is true.
find a lot of people in different parts of the world who have lost their identity. they have no idea where it is because they've just been lost in so many cultures. Part of helping to build a better Nigeria is being able to ensure that you have a place that you can go and you can have an identity. You can have a community, Now we are trying our best to blend into other communities.
Mm-hmm.
I've listened to I've listened to a lot of things, and one of the things that also like boggles my mind is especially when a church is, for example, as an example, like a church is an international church in a different country, somewhere somehow. And for me, growing up in Methodist church, it was so important for me to sing hymns in Yoruba and stuff
I
because
love
that was
hymns.
fun, you
Yeah.
know. But then you have like Nigerian churches they're abroad, and then it's like you can only sing in English, and I'm like, I see where they're
Mm.
coming from because they're trying to grow, but it's also like this is our culture, but all of a sudden it's lost because we need to make sure that everybody is included. And of course, everybody needs to always be included, but there's something about being home. There's something about being able to speak your language. Like the other thing that people always forget is a lot of the countries that are developed now are at this place or are in this space because people decided to fight.
Correct. Correct.
People decided to protest. People decided that they were not going to take anybody's BS. Basically, it's just like they're like, nah, we're not doing that, and they will protest, and they will protest, and they will protest, and they will yell. Like France is very notorious for that, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
If you change anything in France that they don't like, they're outside, and they will shut everything down until you listen to them. There are many countries. The US is the same. If there's any small thing, people will come outside, whether or not you agree with whatever they are doing. They are outside protesting. In the UK, it's the same. Whether or not you agree, people are going outside because people need to understand that the quote unquote ruling class need to understand that there is a contract that we sign. You are supposed to make our lives either better or deliver on the mandate that we put you in place for.
Do you feel
And
that is absent in Nigeria?
it's absent for many reasons. Poverty is poverty is one of them, but it's absent for many reasons. And part of it is also, of course, if you come outside, like look, NSAS was there. I was outside during NSAS. Legitimately, there were situations where some people didn't go home. It's just what it is. Some people didn't go home when they were protesting. Like there are situations where you protest and you go into jail, and if your family is not a big family, nobody will see you again. We've spoken on stories from Nigeria to lawyers who have given us information about people who they just not seen again. They've just not seen them again. There's risk to it. And it's not because Nigerians don't want better. Nigerians do want better, but it's that sometimes when they ask for better, look, you have the Ogoni people and you have the story of Kensarawiwa, for example. Like people protesting and people wanting better for themselves and their people, and none of the Fela protested year after year after year. Now we celebrate him. He has a Grammy, one thing. But part of this information and part of what makes Fela great is that Fela refused to not fight. Like he was going to go outside and fight. And look at what happened to him. I was listening to a podcast about his life, and they were talking about one of the raid that killed his mom, and the fact that he came out whilst the military were trying to get into his house. He came out and he started playing, and he was expecting that. What they said was he was expecting that all of the people who he had spent so much time fighting for, that they would hear his call, and whilst the military were doing the thing, they would come and they would stand for him. But a lot of them were just watching. And it's because they understood the brutality of what it looks like if you do not participate. So now, or if you protest rather, if you don't agree.
Mm-hmm.
So I think, and it may sound like I'm talking about out of two sides of my mouth. I can tell you every single reason why it's not a good idea to protest and why it's a good idea to escape. It's just a reminder that the countries that you are so proud of being part of only got to that place because when these battles came up, the people who were there stood up to be counted. And there were casualties as a result of that. But that's how they got to where they were. And there is no way, I don't think that there's any country, I'm yet to see, where the country got better, corruption was eroded, mismanagement was taken out of place without somebody saying, hey, I'm not taking this anymore. There is no country
Right.
like that.
So in your mind's eye, if I'm replaying it correctly, like you kind of feel that in every kind of developed or industrialized nation in the world or forward thinking generally, there's always been this fight
Yeah.
to get to where they want to be. Either it's like fight for equality, fight for um increase in pay, fight for 5-day work week or 40-hour work week or things like that. There's always been that fight. Do you see that as like if that is not on the board, there's like no way forward. Like there has to be that.
If you're assuming that people are going to be out of their own benevolence, when
Mm,
politicians want to get, when they want to get elected, the first place they go is church now.
mm,
And that's the first place they go now. One thing, I fear God, one thing, okay, no problem. They'll go to a mosque and they'll talk. I'm with you. On their card, they always make it as one Christian, one Muslim to appease the people and say, yeah, you know what? We're with you. But they get into office and they break the commandment. They break the commandment. So if somebody cannot, or somebody stands in front of God and tells God that they're going to do the right thing by their people, and they don't do it, if you cannot hold yourself accountable to God, is it that I don't understand? They want to get better by magic. It doesn't happen now. It doesn't happen. I think when you have a situation that people are more or less hoping or praying for change, and look, I believe in God, but there are things that are important to take into account. We've continued to pray for a miracle that all of a sudden people's hearts will change from now to. We've been praying for Nigeria by church every year. It's not anything. You pray for Nigeria, you pick a word that this year is going to be the year one thing, one thing. The hearts don't change. The people that are in charge, they don't change. And if you're waiting for God to go and help you, you wait.
one thing I would add, so one of the biggest inspirations for me, actually, one of the reasons, even, I love that in the 1960s here in terms of that historical pressure point and what MLK did, it was like, okay, the churches were actually very involved in a lot of like the spreading the word and making the movement. You can't really separate the fight for human rights and the African American church in the US. It's almost one and the same. And thinking back to like a place like Niger, I think one of the reasons why MLK and the rest of the teams were, I think, very effective in my mind's eye is that when they did, whether you call it a sit-in or a strike or a protest, the times it actually made a lot of, and you could correct me if I'm wrong, is when it had a direct financial impact on the oppressing class, right?
Correct.
So
Yes.
sometimes I feel like, a protest can be going on and the oppressing class just see it as like a nuisance. But
Mm-hmm.
if a protest is happening and maybe you're not buying from the shops and they own the shop, then they're like, okay, we have a problem. Or we're not, you own the transport and we're walking, we're not taking your bus, right? So like when I think of Nigeria too, sometimes too, like how do we combine those ideas of like, okay, yes, we need to fight, but also how do we fight effectively? Um, because a ruling class person might just think like, oh, you're in the street, doesn't bother me, right? How, like, I don't know if what I'm saying is landing in terms of like this protest, and then there is like effective protest where it actually becomes kind of a friction and like an inconvenience for the oppressor to then say, okay, let me listen to your demands, for example.
I think there are two kinds of protests, and I think you've hit both of them, right? I think there are more kinds of protests, but there are two, right?
Mm,
There's physical and call it non-physical, right? There's a physical one where you actually blockade everything. That's exactly what happened in 2020. You just block everything. Just,
Hmm.
just block everything. And the first 2 days is like, yeah, they will stop. Day three, day four, like, now it's affecting money. When you start to affect people's pockets, you actually see what will happen. Like you will
Right.
really you get to understand what's going on. Like there's no ambiguity there. You cannot mess with people's money. The second one that you already mentioned is not buying a particular brand or not partaking in something that is important to that oppressor, so to speak, right? It involves taking a stand and it involves togetherness, right? We joke about this football thing a lot. And legitimately, one of the reasons why football fans can't make a change anymore significantly is because there are just too many. So if you say tomorrow that you need to empty the stadium because you're like it will be hard, you may be able to get people to empty the stadium 5 minutes beforehand, and there'll be a section that is empty so that they will talk about it. But it's not affecting anybody's money because you ended up buying a ticket.
Mm, mm.
So yeah, it doesn't look good, but cool. They'll just type that, oh, we're listening to you, and you move on. I think it's important to keep that in mind, and it's important to understand that there's a lot of power in numbers. People who know what they are supposed to receive. And the more people who are dissatisfied, and the more people who are ready to speak up, and the more people who are ready to take a stand for a particular thing in a particular way, the harder it is to avoid them, the harder it is to ignore them, you know? And we talk about this all the time, but like, I think to also do that is to have a sense of community, is to have a sense of responsibility for somebody else, right? I've lived in countries where if you leave your phone somewhere for 24 hours, you'll come back and meet it there in a public space. And it's because the community has decided that this is how we are going to be. It's not anything, we are just going to be this way. So people will most likely look for you to give you said thing if they can. And I remember there was a day my sister lost her wallet somewhere in Lagos. No, a thief had broken into her window and they took her wallet and I think they took her phone and stuff. And maybe a week later, maybe 2 weeks later, we got a ring on the bell. Like, okay, who is that? And they brought the wallet back. Of course, it was free of money and everything, but the person just said, I saw it on a bus and I brought it back to you. And we're like, that's very weird. That doesn't happen a lot in Nigeria. Like, that's not something that happens. It's so weird that you just, oh, wow, thank you so much because it's doing good is out of the ordinary. But it's important to also take into account that, look, we generally speaking are not our brother's keeper. We're not particularly good at that. That has been the case ever since the British people came and decided that they were going to divide us, you know, in ethnic. They are going to use ethnicity to divide us. And so then you don't trust people. There are legitimately people that just won't work with you who are from Ogun State. They won't work with somebody from Oyo State, legitimately. Regardless
I
of
will.
this all the other things. It's just
Mhm.
you won't just do that. And I think there's a sense of community, there's a sense of belonging, there's a sense of wanting your neighbor to be in a better position. That is important to be able to fight, or I use fight loosely, but to be able to fight for something that you believe in.
Yeah. I One thing that really stood out, like when you were giving the example of like the distrust, in my heart of hearts, I truly believe that the Nigerian person does have is their brother's keeper. So that's why I'll push back a little bit. But the analogy that I think me and you have even had in different conversations is like when you're in a trauma state,
Mhm.
as a let's say relationally, for example, let's say um you had a relationship with somebody and they treated you really bad, and now you're in a new relationship with somebody. There's some trigger that would just reflex that you just from past memory.
Yeah.
If we were to consider Nigeria as like a person, that's kind
Mhm.
of how I usually think it. there's just been a lot of like oppression, whether it's from colonialism, whether it's post-colonialism, whether it's like civil war. There's a lot of things that have added layers to a lot of people being in survival mode of where like I just need to. So a lot of times it's not I feel like it's not even coming from the heart of hearts of the person, who the person is genuinely a good person, but a good person in survival mode is capable of anything. Like, some people might disagree, but I always, some people use also the example of like the Lord of the Flies scenario because it's like a kid's thing. But like when you're in a situation whereby you have to ensure your survival, your immediate family survival, I feel like in those situations, I'm not giving a pass to not being ones, but I just feel like in those situations, even good people or supposedly good people would do things that one did not anticipate. So that's kind of how I feel about that. But I think it's something we should probably even talk more on, maybe like in our next episode. And another thought that I wanted to leave with you, I don't know, we're getting close here, is when we talk about like protests and even being the example you gave of the person who brought the purse back. What came to my mind a little bit is people who feel that they have power. And what do I mean by that? Like when you talk about the French people, or even the Americans, right? There is this sense that, like, oh, yes, this person is in government, but truly I am the one who has the power to put him there and take him out, right?
Mhm.
So when they're not doing well, I feel empowered to kick him out, to say, like, I put you there, you're not doing it. I still feel powerful, even though I'm not in said office. The people collectively feel powerful. I think if we look at Nigeria a little bit, it is possible that, there's the famous quote like, power belongs to where we think it is. It, by default, somebody is not just powerful by themselves, right? Here and in Europe, I think they believe that the power is with the people. I think it's like rooted in there. I might be wrong. But in Nigeria, I feel like by default, like the power is with the elite, like in general. So I wonder if that's something that was also playing a part of like, if you don't feel that the power resides in you, then why would you feel the obligation to fight that, like, maybe I don't know if those thoughts are connecting.
Yeah, no, it connects. I think it connects because it's look, at the end of the day, we call people in power, for instance, Your Excellency. You know,
Hmm.
as an example, right? Your Excellency cannot come without 50 convoy, and that's power.
Yeah.
But like you're talking, and we'll talk about it the next time also. Because when you're talking, I'm like, it's the same as Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right?
Right,
You
right,
have
right.
you have before you get to stage two, you have to pass stage one. And if you don't have stage one, we are talking about shelter here. If you don't have shelter, you don't have clothes
Yeah,
on your back. You don't have like thinking about somebody else is hard.
it's hard.
So yeah. But we'll talk about it. It's a good conversation. I think it's a conversation that has to be based on a lot of fact as well as feelings and reality. But it's a conversation that has to continue because, like, a lot of people have to have that conversation, and a lot of people have to understand what they offer to make the countries that they want to be better better. And it's a question you
Yeah,
just have to ask, and it's something that if you answer the question and you can sleep well at night, then
yeah.
perfect,
Well said. Well said.
perfect.
I think it's like a really good start.
Yeah,
For
yeah.
some reason I hear some random person knocking on my door. I hope it's FedEx or some Amazon. But I think this is like a good start in a conversation that I really want us to continue to kind of explore this idea of like, why activism? What kind of activism? Where does power? And I think the more we have these conversations, I think sometimes too, as individuals, is sometimes maybe even hard to come up with this is my action item. What can I do to change Nigeria? Like, and I am hoping that with these conversations and the insight that you're gonna share with us, that people can come out and kind of have some sort of direction, some sort of guidance in, okay, this problem is good. The problem is so big. If it was small, somebody would have solved it.
Yeah,
How can we shed a little light, and hopefully get some direction in our own little spheres and influence the big thing in the future? So I'm glad we are back online. So hopefully, I believe next week again we'll run it back or the
yeah, we're
following
running
week.
it back.
But
Yeah.
this is a great start. Any final thoughts and before we stop the recording?
No, no, no. It's a good place to start. So we'll kick it off again. The second one. I feel like there's always there's always more, and we just have to keep looking and also put historical perspective on it. But we'll do that.
Sounds good. And talk soon. Thanks, bro.
Talk soon.
All right.